everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andrea. It's nice to have you guys here. Today I thought I would do a Fibro chat video. It's just me here at my desk. I've got a cup of coffee and I've got a little sticky pad note of a few things to talk about. I've been wanting to film this video for a little while. I didn't want this video to come across as me complaining, but I thought it would be useful for some people for me to sit down and film a video detailing what a fibro flare feels like. Obviously this is my personal experience. Other people with fibromyalgia will have flares that feel a little bit different, but I've done videos on my fibro story, I've done videos on how I can tell when I'm getting a flare, but I've never really sat down and detailed symptom by symptom what a fibro flare actually feels like now that I'm kind of through my last one. So the reason why I thought this might be a good video to do was because in January I caught my third cold in 3 months. So I was sick in November, I was sick in December, and then I got sick again in January. Something about the 3 colds back to back to back triggered a massive fibro flare, probably one of the biggest flares I've had since my diagnosis, which was early 2016. I've had flares where maybe the symptoms or the severity was higher, but it didn't last as long, or where for a month I could tell that like my body was really going through something, but it wasn't that much worse than what I normally deal with. Starting the beginning of February, I think because I got sick mid-January, and then it really wasn't until my birthday at the end of February that my cough finally calmed down and went away, and then I was still just really exhausted, and teaching and working full-time on top of all of that did not help. I tried filming back around that time, but it felt like I'm still going through everything. It just feels like I'm sitting here complaining, and that wasn't the intention of the video. So now that I'm feeling a little bit better, a little bit more back to normal, the main symptoms of a fibro flare for me are pretty much the main symptoms of fibro, but all at once and at a higher severity than normal. And so that's how I know when I have a fibro flare. So for me, that's the pain, the brain fog, and the fatigue. As I said before, sometimes it can be a higher severity over a short period of time, or it can be slightly higher, but not that much worse, but spread out over a longer period of time. And I'd say that what I dealt with in February was not super severe, but more than just slightly elevated from normal. It was kind of a moderate severity from normal, but then spread out over the course of, I'd say probably at least 2 months, if not slightly longer. And I don't know from other people like what the average duration of a flare is, if that's like longer than normal or shorter than normal. It's longer than normal for me. Normally my flares will be like a week or two, because normally I can then recognize, okay, I'm in a flare, I need to like change things up, make some adjustments, and like get my body to calm back down. But this time, because of being sick, because of having to work, there was only so much I could do to adjust my schedule. It wasn't good. So those are the 3 main symptoms with a flare. But then the other thing that can accompany a flare for me is a spike in my depression. I struggle with anxiety and depression just generally, but I am in therapy for that, and I've done a lot of work and a lot of like internal growing and adjusting and learning coping skills and learning how to manage my anxiety and depression. So generally those 2 things aren't nearly as debilitating as they used to be. But when I have a flare, it gets harder to cope because I feel like I'm being hit from all sides. So going through the 3 main symptoms kind of one by one and explaining what those feel like. So pain. Fibro pain is really tricky, and I feel like I probably have explained this a little bit in a previous video, but fibro pain, it's not just oh, my body hurts. It's not just an achiness. There are actually several different types of pain. And so that can be everything from a kind of all over achiness, kind of like when you get the flu, to sharp isolated pain. The most common pain for fibromyalgia are the pain points or trigger points. So there's like 9 or so of them scattered throughout the body. So like along the collarbone, along the shoulders, elbows, I think, and then going further down the body. And so the pain can be really concentrated in those points. And just like, I'm a lot better now, but like back in February, just like lightly touching my collarbone felt like pressing on a bruise. And so with the trigger points, it can either be, for me, it can either be that feeling of like pressing on a bruise, or sometimes it can just be a throbbing pain in that area. So like my shoulders will just start throbbing, which isn't fun. It can also be nerve pain. So sometimes I'll just get a random pain that just feels like my nerves are acting up. Sometimes it'll be a shooting pain that just feels like a lightning bolt running up my nerve. Those are super fun. I used to think I was so paranoid and crazy about this one, and then I saw it confirmed online. An itch that is so bad it's actually painful. I get those in my feet a lot, and I'm sure some of these pains also overlap with other chronic illnesses and other conditions, but I can only speak to it from a fibromyalgia standpoint. And those are just a few. There's other pains, and then there's headaches and things like that. So the pain is definitely fun, and I feel like during a flare, when it's just normal day to day, like right now, I've got a bit of like general achiness and tension across my shoulders and my upper back, but overall I'd say sitting here my pain level is probably around like a 4 or a 5. I don't think I'm ever lower than a 3. On a good day, on a really good day, I wake up at a 3 and then maybe only get up to like a 6 by the end of the day. But there are days where I wake up at like a 5 and I go to sleep at like a 9. And that's the thing. During a flare, my pain levels all ramp up a bit. So I'm waking up at a much higher level, and by the end of the day, everything hurts. I mean, there were nights in January and February where I did literally cry myself to sleep because the pain was just that bad. I try ice, I try heat. When I'm desperate, we'll try pain medication, but because of what causes the fibro pain, regular pain medication doesn't work because it's a nerve and a brain thing more than an actual pain sensor thing. So the pain during a flare is really bad. Even when it's not so bad, it's the consistency of it. So that's the other side of the pain factor during a flare. Even when the pain is kind of always pretty steady, you know, for like a week it might be steady at like a 5 all day long. And it's one of those things where like I'll be sitting there just knowing if I could transfer this pain onto someone else for 15 minutes, they would think I'm absolutely crazy for complaining. They would think it's not that bad. I mean, it hurts. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but like, grow up. Like, it's not that bad. But when you are living with moderate pain all day, every day, for days and weeks on end, I think this is the thing that's most frustrating for me about fibromyalgia, and I would imagine it's probably the same for other conditions, chronic conditions, where the general day-to-day of the symptoms aren't that bad. And if it was just 1 or 2 days, a month, or even a week that you had to do it, if it was just, 20% of the time that you felt that way, you probably would be able to kind of shake it off and just move on. But it's kind of like when I was in Paris and realized that my waterproof boots weren't as waterproof as they were supposed to be, at least not the left boot. And so the first 15 minutes of walking around with a wet, sloshy boot wasn't that bad. I was in Paris. I didn't care. I was just going to deal with it. I was just going to roll with it. I've only got the day to be here. Like, I'm going to enjoy it. So the first 15 minutes, suck it up. I'm fine. First hour, not that comfortable, but again, I'm in Paris. I don't care. 3 hours in, 4 hours in. I think by the time we got on the train going back to London, I'd been walking around with a cold, wet foot for 8 hours by that time. I was over it. What had been easy and manageable hour 1, by hour 8, I was ready to scream. And getting back to the flat in London, taking off that boot, taking off that wet sock, finally like drying my foot, warming it up was just heaven. So when people talk about their chronic pain or their chronic fatigue, and someone responds with, take some Tylenol, or take a nap, or whatever. Number one, if it was that simple, we would do it. Number two, it's really dismissing the psychological toll it takes on you to live through those types of symptoms over a sustained period. And so that's where the pain that I was dealing with a couple months ago was in some ways not that much worse than what I'm dealing with right now, but it was constant. It was waking up with that pain, it was going to bed with worse pain, and then not having my body fully reset while I sleep so that the next day I woke up again already in a fair amount of pain. When you are waking up consistently at a 5 or a 6 on the 1 to 10 pain scale, living chronically at a 5 or a 6 is pretty miserable. The pain was definitely an issue and probably the hardest thing. The next hardest thing, I think, was the brain fog. Fatigue I put at the third hardest, but I think that's because I've gotten used to being tired. So we'll talk about the fatigue in a second. The brain fog was really bad. So the brain fog, or fibro fog as we call it, difficulty concentrating. It was hard for me to remain coherent. Any videos I managed to film and upload at that time took me so much longer than usual. I was constantly having to restart sentences, or there were long pauses in the middle of sentences. I could not hold a thought together. Tasks that normally took me, 5 minutes were taking me 30. And they were taking anywhere from 3 to 5, 6 times longer than usual. So grading papers was taking longer, sending emails was taking longer, reading emails and student discussions and having to process what they're saying, kind of going through that process of reading, processing, evaluating, and then applying some kind of comment or criticism and grade evaluation was really hard. Conversations just with family and friends were a struggle. And even if it didn't seem like a struggle, as I was talking to someone, I might have seemed okay in that moment, but then as soon as I hung up, I just completely crashed. As someone who is kind of a type A perfectionist, it's really, really hard when I can't speak straight. I can't speak coherently. I can't string together sentences and thoughts and ideas. Writing was really difficult. This was why it took me so long to do the formatting for the paperback of my novel, because sitting down and having to do anything that required a kind of strict focus, which formatting does. You have to be paying attention to margins and spacing and font and all of these different things, and there's a lot of moving parts. I could only sit down to work on formatting for 30 minutes at a time, and then I end up with such a massive headache. It's not fun when you're someone who likes to think of herself as a pretty smart person sitting here with a PhD, and I'm making so many little mistakes, just little errors that I normally wouldn't make, and things are taking me so much longer to complete, and that then adds to the kind of psychological effect and trying not to beat myself up over these things and recognizing this is the fibro, you know what this isn't a reflection on you or your abilities, but even then there's only so many days you can remind yourself of that and have those kind of positive affirmations before it just starts to feel ridiculous. So the third big symptom then is the fatigue. And I feel like this is the one that I've just adjusted to the most. I just know I'm not a morning person. I have insomnia sometimes. Sleep is a struggle. And so I'm just going to feel tired more days than not. And so I've developed things to help me get through my day, still get work done. Things like having my planner, having a detailed task list, not overloading my task list for a particular day. All of those things kind of help me manage the fatigue. Also having a comfortable workspace here at my desk, but also giving myself permission to work in bed if I need to work in bed. So not having any hard and fast rules over how I have to be in a work day. So the fatigue, I feel like, is manageable most of the time, but during a flare, I mean, there are days where it literally takes me almost 2 full hours to fully wake up. This isn't most days when I'm not in a flare, but even when I'm in a flare, this isn't every day of the flare. It's not this bad all the time throughout the duration of a flare. But there are some days where I literally cannot lift my head off the pillow. It's not a mindset thing. It's not a me being lazy thing. That's not the kind of fatigue I'm talking about. I'm talking about your body being so tired and so worn out that it literally cannot function, where lifting your arm feels like there is a 20-pound weight on top of your arm. Again, it's not like that every day. When that happens, the thought of getting out of bed as soon as my alarm goes off is just unthinkable in that moment. And so it's a much more gradual process of slowly letting my body wake up, the fatigue kind of not disappearing, but just getting to a point where, okay, now I can kind of prop myself up in bed. Okay, 15, 20 minutes later, now I can sit up in bed. Okay, now a few minutes after that, I can swing my legs off the side of the bed. It's a very gradual process. So the fatigue is definitely something that I struggle with, but I feel like because I have bad fatigue days a lot, even when I'm not in a flare, it's the one that is the easiest for me to manage when I'm in a flare. So then during a flare, the kind of final thing or big thing, there's lots of little things that I can't get into or we'd be here for 5 hours. So the pain, the brain fog, and the fatigue are the 3 kind of main things that I deal with. And then the kind of underlying thing that develops and can get worse throughout a flare as a result of these other 3 symptoms having the increase is the depression that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So when you are going through a longer sustained period of increased pain, increased brain fog, increased fatigue, that will have a knock-on effect on your mental health. So whether you struggle with depression or not on top of your chronic illness, I think having a bit of depression develop in response to a flare is perfectly normal. For me, because of how exhausted and how much pain I'm in, it can be really easy to fall back into old patterns of feeling like my body is against me, everything's unfair, feeling lonely, feeling overwhelmed. You know, I'm still having to do my laundry and do my dishes. And it's like, if the flare only lasts for a few days, which I don't think I've had one only last 3 days, but like if it only lasts for a week or so, like I can let the laundry stack up, I can let the dishes stack up for it to a certain extent. But when it's a month or more and you're having to do all the normal kind of life tasks and household tasks on top of managing the flare, it can really mess you up mentally and make it really difficult. I've had to learn how to manage the mental side of things. I've had to allow myself to bring that up in therapy. You know, when I was still going to, I go to therapy all the time, but when I was going to therapy during the flare, it was something that we would talk about. So for me, it's been really important to talk to people, at least to my therapist, about how I'm feeling mentally when I'm having a flare. The other thing I do in terms of kind of getting more to like an advice portion of this video, if we can call it this, that, how I manage these, how I deal with these, how I deal with a flare in general. Communication is really important. So telling the people in my life, hey, I'm sorry, but like I'm going through a flare right now. Here's what I'm able to do and here's what I'm not able to do. Not hiding it. I think that's for me the biggest thing. Not hiding when I'm in a flare. Talking about it in my vlogs, talking about it with my friends and family, letting them know I'm in a flare, I've got more limitations than usual right now, and doing things really ramping up the self-care, letting myself sleep more, making sure that I am listening to my body, and if it's saying it wants something, does it need more water? Does it need more sleep? Does it need more rest throughout the day? Does it need yoga? Does it need certain foods? Really paying attention to that and just recognizing that my normal routine isn't going to work during a flare, and I have to really kind of come back in to what my body is saying and learn to really listen to that. And I think that's where shifting your mindset, and I've talked about this in previous Fibro videos, I try really hard not to look at it as me against my body. My body cannot be the enemy in this. Instead, it's my body and I against the fibro. The fibro is the enemy. There is this thing in my body that is causing these problems. And so what can I do to help my body and take care of my body and nurture my body in a way that will help it be able to fight the fibro when you're going through a flare? You know, the worst thing to do, I think, is to continue to push yourself really hard or to beat yourself up mentally because you're not working to your normal performance levels. Learning how to be kind to yourself and just kind of take those steps back and really listen to what your body is saying and what your body needs. Giving yourself permission to just spend a whole day in bed watching Netflix and dozing off, napping. Like, if that's what your body needs, don't fight that. Obviously, you know, I've had to work, I've been working full time, and so I couldn't do that all day, every day. On the days where I have had a really busy schedule and I couldn't get out of things, on the days that it was more of a 9 to 5 type schedule, once 5 o'clock hit, once I had my 8 hours for the workday, I was done. I wasn't doing dishes, I wasn't doing laundry, I wasn't doing other household chores. I let stuff stack up, I let stuff slide. I dealt with it later when I felt better. So that's kind of my advice in a nutshell. I think if I had to sum up the advice, is you really do have to figure out what works best for you, because obviously my flares might be worse than some, they might be easier than some. So if you're dealing with fibro or a similar type of chronic illness, how you manage things is going to be a little bit different than how I manage things. But I think it's important that you find out what works for you and how you can manage your symptoms, how you can manage a flare in your chronic illness so that it's not completely debilitating, or so that if it is completely debilitating, it doesn't string out for as long as it would if you tried to push through it. I've definitely learned that. My flares last longer when I try to push through them. So I've learned not to push through them, to just make things as easy as possible, as soon as I can, just to try to cut down on the time frame. So that's this video. I hope that if you are dealing with something like this video has helped. I hope that if you're one of my regular viewers who don't have a chronic illness, but you just watch me and are kind enough to watch this video anyway, I hope this has given you some insight into what I'm dealing with when I say I'm having a flare, because I do mention that in the vlogs, but I don't always get specific about what I'm dealing with. So hopefully this has helped you understand things and understand me a little bit better. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, do give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Let me know if you have any other Fibro chat videos you would like me to do. Say hi in the comments. Let me know how you're doing. Let me know your thoughts on flares and what I've been talking about. And I will see you all soon in the next video. Thank you very much for watching this one. Bye-bye.